Dumi,
Kibo whispered, kneeling beside the young man.
we have to go. Now.
Dumi nodded weakly, his eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Kibo helped him to his feet, and together, they began to move through the tunnel, Kibo leading the way with his staff casting a small circle of light around them. But the light was weak, and the shadows seemed to press in on them from all sides, growing darker and more malevolent. Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to our gripping tale. If you've been with us so far, you know that the journey of Dumi and Kibo has been nothing short of extraordinary. In the last episode, we left our heroes in a dire situation. After returning to their village of Sakana, they discovered that the chief's illness was not the only threat they faced. The dark force they encountered in the forest was just the beginning. As they ventured deeper into the unknown, Dumi and Kibo were plunged into a dark abyss, an abyss that holds terrifying secrets and creatures born of pure shadow. Now, the danger is greater than ever, and our heroes must find a way out before the darkness consumes them completely. Buckle up, because this episode is going to take you on a roller coaster of emotions, with twists and turns that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's dive back in and see what awaits Dumi and Kibo in the abyss. The darkness of the abyss was like nothing Dumi had ever experienced. It was thick and suffocating, wrapping around him like a living thing. Every breath he took felt heavy, as if the very air was resisting him. His eyes strained to see, but there was nothing but the black void in every direction. He reached out, feeling the cold, damp stone walls that surrounded him, but they offered little comfort. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, and for the first time, Dumi felt the icy fingers of fear gripping his heart.
Kibo.
Dumi's voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. He knew the old man was somewhere above him, but the chasm between them felt like an insurmountable distance. He forced himself to move, each step uncertain and shaky on the uneven ground. His thoughts were a whirlwind of worry for Kibo, for the village, and for himself. But beneath it all was a flicker of determination. He had faced danger before, and had always come out on top. This would be no different. He would find Kibo, and they would find a way out of this nightmare. As he moved deeper into the abyss, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to press in on him from all sides. The sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness, a constant reminder of the deep, hidden world he had fallen into. But there was something else, too, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. It was faint at first, like a distant growl, but it grew louder with each step. Something was down here with him, something that did not want him to leave.
Kibo.
Dumi whispered again, this time more urgently. The sense of dread was growing, and with it, the realization that he might not be alone in this darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted, and Dumi stumbled, barely catching himself on the wall. The growling sound was closer now, reverberating through the stone. Dumi's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that whatever was making that sound was coming for him. He had to move, now. Drawing on every ounce of strength he had left, Dumi pushed himself forward, stumbling through the dark tunnel. His mind raced, trying to remember the path he had taken, but the abyss was a labyrinth, and every direction looked the same. The growling was deafening now, echoing off the walls as if the very shadows were growling at him. And then, out of the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared, staring at him with a hunger that chilled him to the bone. Dumi froze, his breath catching in his throat as the creature stepped out of the shadows. It was like nothing he had ever seen, a monstrous form made of pure shadow, its body rippling and shifting like a living nightmare. Its claws were long and sharp, and its fangs gleamed in the faint light as it let out a snarl that echoed through the tunnel. Dumi took a step back, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The creature moved closer, its eyes locked on Dumi with an intensity that left no doubt. It was going to attack.
Kibo.
Dumi shouted, his voice breaking the silence. He hoped, prayed, that the old man could hear him. But there was no time to wait. The creature lunged, its claws slashing through the air, and Dumi barely managed to throw himself to the side, crashing against the cold stone wall. Pain shot through his body, but Dumi forced himself to move, to get up and run. He couldn't fight this thing, not here, not now. His only hope was to find Kibo and find a way out of this abyss before it was too late. But as he ran, the creature was right behind him, its growls filling the air with terror. Dumi's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He had to survive. For Kibo, for the village, for himself. Kibo's descent into the abyss was slow and cautious. The path was treacherous, and each step he took was measured and careful. The old man's heart was heavy with fear for Dumi, but his resolve was unshakable. He had seen many things in his long life, had faced dangers that would have broken lesser men, but this abyss, it was something else entirely. It was as if the very shadows were alive, twisting and writhing, eager to swallow them whole.
Kibo!
Dumi's voice echoed faintly from somewhere below, and Kibo's heart leaped with hope. Dumi was still alive, but the sound of the boy's voice was filled with fear, and Kibo knew that something terrible was happening.
Kibo! Please, help!
The plea was weak, desperate, and it cut through Kibo like a knife. He quickened his pace, his staff glowing faintly in the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with tension, and the growls that echoed through the tunnels were growing louder, more menacing. Whatever was down there, it was hunting Dumi, and Kibo had to reach him before it was too late. As Kibo rounded a corner, the tunnel opened up into a small cavern, and there, lying on the cold, damp ground, was Dumi. The young man was breathing heavily, his face pale and streaked with sweat. Kibo's heart ached at the sight of him, but there was no time for sentiment. The creature was close. He could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows shifted and moved.
Dumi,
Kibo whispered, kneeling beside the young man.
we have to go. Now.
Dumi nodded weakly, his eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Kibo helped him to his feet, and together, they began to move through the tunnel, Kibo leading the way with his staff casting a small circle of light around them. But the light was weak, and the shadows seemed to press in on them from all sides, growing darker and more malevolent. The growls were getting closer, and Kibo could feel the creature's presence, like a cold hand gripping his heart. He tightened his grip on his staff, his mind racing. There had to be a way out, a way to escape this nightmare before it was too late. But as they moved deeper into the abyss, the tunnels seemed to close in on them, twisting and turning like a maze designed to trap them. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was so thick it was almost suffocating. Dumi's breathing was labored, and Kibo could feel the young man's strength waning.
Kibo,
Dumi's voice was barely a whisper.
I can't go on.
you must.
Kibo replied, his voice gentle but firm.
We must find a way out of here together.
But even as he spoke, Kibo could feel the darkness closing in, could hear the creature's growls echoing through the tunnels like a death knell. They were running out of time. And then, just as hope began to slip away, Kibo spotted a faint light ahead, a small, flickering flame in the darkness. It was weak, barely visible, but it was something. A way out.
This way.
Kibo urged, pulling Dumi along with renewed urgency.
We're almost there.
But as they approached the light, the creature appeared, its glowing red eyes locking onto them with a terrifying intensity. It was faster, more powerful than anything they had faced before, and it was not going to let them escape. Kibo pushed Dumi behind him, raising his staff as the creature lunged at them with a snarl that echoed through the cavern. The force of the attack sent Kibo stumbling back, and the light flickered, threatening to go out completely.
No,
Kibo whispered, his heart pounding in his chest.
not like this.
But the creature was relentless, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Kibo fought back with everything he had, his staff glowing brighter as he channeled all his strength into holding the creature at bay. But the darkness was too strong, too overwhelming, and Kibo could feel his energy waning. Dumi, still behind Kibo, watched in horror as the creature pressed its attack. He knew Kibo was strong, wise, and resilient, but he also knew that the old man couldn't hold out forever. The creature's power was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was raw, primal, and utterly terrifying.
Kibo!
Dumi cried out, desperation lacing his voice. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Summoning every ounce of courage he had left, Dumi grabbed one of the strange objects he had taken from the forest, the ones that had repelled the darkness before, and hurled it at the creature. The object struck the creature in its chest, and for a moment, there was a blinding flash of light. The creature recoiled, letting out a howl of pain that echoed through the entire abyss. It staggered back, its form flickering and wavering, as if it was struggling to maintain its shape. Kibo seized the opportunity, raising his staff high and unleashing a powerful burst of energy. The light from the staff shot forward like a beam, striking the creature with full force. The shadows around them seemed to shudder and withdraw as the creature let out another agonized scream. But the victory was short-lived. Even as the creature faltered, it managed to lash out with one final desperate strike. Its claws slashed through the air, catching Kibo across the chest. The old man cried out in pain, stumbling backward as the creature finally disintegrated into nothingness, its form dissolving into the shadows. Dumi rushed forward, catching Kibo before he could fall. The old man was breathing heavily, blood seeping through his robes where the creature had struck him. But even in his weakened state, Kibo managed a faint smile.
You did well, Dumi.
Kibo whispered, his voice filled with pride.
You have a strength within you, a strength that will see you through this.
Dumi's heart ached as he looked at Kibo's injuries. The old man was hurt, badly hurt, and they were still trapped in this abyss with no clear way out. But they had survived, and as long as they were alive, there was still hope.
Come on, Kibo.
Dumi said, his voice choked with emotion.
We're getting out of here. We're going home.
With great effort, Dumi helped Kibo to his feet, and together, they made their way toward the flickering light that had guided them before. It was faint, but it was a beacon, a promise of escape from the darkness that had tried to claim them. As they moved forward, the tunnels seemed to open up, the oppressive atmosphere lifting just slightly. The way out was still far, but they were closer now, and Dumi's resolve was stronger than ever. They had faced the abyss and survived. Now they just had to find their way back to the light. The small flicker of light ahead was their only hope, and Dumi clung to it with everything he had. Every step was a struggle, his body aching and his mind racing with fear and determination. Kibo leaned heavily on him, his breathing labored but steady. The old man had been their guiding light through so many trials, and now Dumi was determined to return the favor.
Kibo, stay with me.
Dumi urged, his voice filled with a mixture of desperation and encouragement.
We're almost there. Just a little further.
Kibo managed a weak nod, but Dumi could see the strain on his face. The old man's injuries were severe, and the journey through the abyss had taken a toll on both of them. But giving up was not an option. Not now. Not when they were so close. As they moved closer to the light, the darkness around them seemed to retreat, the oppressive weight lifting just enough for them to breathe a little easier. The light wasn't bright, but it was warm and steady, a stark contrast to the cold, malevolent shadows that had haunted them in the abyss. Finally, they reached the source of the light, a small, glowing crystal embedded in the rock wall. It was unlike anything Dumi had ever seen, its surface shimmering with a soft, golden glow that seemed to pulse gently, as if alive.
What? What is it?
Dumi asked, his voice filled with awe and wonder. Kibo, though weakened, managed to muster a faint smile.
A guiding light, a beacon.
He murmured.
It's ancient magic, from a time long forgotten, a gift from the ancestors.
Dumi reached out, his fingers brushing against the crystal's smooth surface. As soon as he touched it, a wave of warmth spread through his body, soothing his aches and calming his fears. The light seemed to respond to his touch, growing brighter, and for the first time since they had entered the abyss, Dumi felt a glimmer of hope.
We can use this.
Dumi said, turning to Kibo.
This can guide us out of here.
Kibo nodded weakly, his eyes filled with pride as he looked at Dumi.
You have a gift, Dumi. The light responds to you. You can lead us out.
With renewed determination, Dumi helped Kibo to stand, and together, they began to follow the path illuminated by the glowing crystal. The light was faint but steady, casting long shadows on the walls as they moved forward. The tunnels twisted and turned, but the light never wavered, always guiding them toward safety. As they walked, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive darkness seemed to fade away. Dumi's heart lifted with each step, the hope of escape growing stronger with every moment. But even as they moved closer to the exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone.
Kibo, do you feel that?
Dumi asked, his voice hushed. Kibo's expression grew serious, and he nodded.
Yes, the darkness. It's still watching us. Waiting.
Dumi tightened his grip on the crystal, its light pulsing in response. Whatever was lurking in the shadows, it hadn't given up. But Dumi wouldn't let it win. Not after everything they had been through. They rounded a final corner, and there, ahead of them, was the exit, a narrow opening in the rock wall, through which a faint glimmer of daylight could be seen. Dumi's heart soared at the sight, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet.
Kibo, stay close.
Dumi whispered, his voice filled with urgency.
We're almost there.
But as they approached the exit, the shadows around them began to shift and twist, coalescing into a familiar, terrifying form. The creature, the same creature they had faced before, reappeared, its glowing red eyes filled with hatred and malice.
No!
Dumi shouted, stepping in front of Kibo as the creature lunged at them. He raised the crystal, its light flaring brightly as it met the creature's attack. The creature howled in pain, its form flickering and wavering under the intense light. But it didn't retreat. It pressed forward, determined to stop them from escaping. Dumi gritted his teeth, channeling all his strength into the crystal. The light grew brighter, pushing back the shadows, but the creature was relentless, its claws slashing through the air with deadly intent.
Kibo, go!
Dumi shouted, his voice filled with desperation.
I'll hold it off. Just get out of here.
But Kibo didn't move. The old man stood his ground, his staff glowing with a faint light as he prepared to fight alongside Dumi.
We leave together, Dumi.
Kibo said, his voice filled with quiet determination.
Or not at all.
Together, they faced the creature, their lights combining to form a barrier of pure energy. The creature howled in rage, its form disintegrating under the assault. With one final desperate effort, Dumi and Kibo pushed the creature back, its body shattering into fragments of shadow that dissolved into the air. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone, leaving only the faint echoes of its howls behind. Dumi's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground, panting heavily. Kibo knelt beside him, his expression a mix of exhaustion and relief.
You did it, Dumi.
Kibo said, his voice filled with admiration.
You saved us.
But Dumi shook his head, his heart still pounding in his chest.
We saved each other.
He replied, his voice hoarse.
We wouldn't have made it without you.
Kibo smiled, and together they slowly made their way toward the exit. The light of the crystal guided them, leading them out of the darkness and back into the world above. The moment Dumi and Kibo stepped out of the abyss and into the light, it felt like they were reborn. The warm sun kissed their skin, and the fresh air filled their lungs, a stark contrast to the cold, suffocating darkness they had just escaped. Dumi closed his eyes, letting the warmth wash over him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to relax. Dumi whispered, his voice filled with disbelief.
We're out. We actually made it out.
Kibo, though exhausted, managed a smile.
Yes, Dumi, we're out. Thanks to you.
But even as the relief washed over them, Dumi couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The village was eerily quiet, and the familiar sounds of daily life in Sakana were absent. The air felt heavy with tension, as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Dumi exchanged a concerned glance with Kibo, who nodded, understanding his unspoken worry. They had escaped the abyss, but the battle wasn't over. Something was still wrong, and they needed to find out what.
We should check on the village.
Dumi said, his voice steady but filled with apprehension.
Something doesn't feel right.
Kibo nodded in agreement, and together they began the walk back to Sakana. The path that once felt so familiar now seemed foreign, the trees and landscape casting long, ominous shadows despite the bright sunlight. Dumi's heart pounded in his chest as they drew closer to the village, a sense of dread gnawing at the edges of his mind. When they finally reached the outskirts of the village, the sight that greeted them made Dumi's blood run cold. The villagers were gathered in the square, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. At the center of the crowd stood the village chief, still frail and weakened from his illness. But now he seemed more alert, his eyes filled with a strange intensity.
What's happening?
Dumi asked as he pushed through the crowd, Kibo close behind. The chief looked up at Dumi, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something else, something darker.
Dumi, Kibo, you have returned.
The chief said, his voice low and filled with an edge of suspicion.
But what did you bring back with you?
Dumi frowned, confusion and alarm rising within him.
We didn't bring anything back, Chief. We were just trying to escape the darkness in the abyss.
The chief's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his frail body trembling with effort.
The darkness has spread, Dumi. It's not just in the abyss anymore. It's here, in Sakana.
A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd, and Dumi felt his heart sink. How could this be? They had fought so hard, escaped the abyss, defeated the creature. Yet it seemed the darkness had followed them, infiltrating the very heart of their village.
What can we do?
Dumi asked, desperation lacing his voice. He had thought the battle was over, but now it seemed it was just beginning. Kibo stepped forward, his expression grim but resolute.
We must find the source of this darkness. It has taken root here, in our home, but it can be driven out, if we stand together.
The villagers looked at one another, fear and uncertainty written on their faces. They had already endured so much, but Dumi could see the resolve in their eyes. They were ready to fight for their home, for their lives, just as he and Kibo had done in the abyss.
We'll fight. We'll fight together.
Dumi said, his voice firm. The chief nodded, though his expression remained troubled.
But be warned, Dumi. This darkness, it's not like anything we've faced before. It's stronger, more insidious. And it knows us. It knows our weaknesses.
Dumi felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no room for doubt, not now. He had to believe that they could overcome this, just as they had overcome the abyss.
Then we'll outsmart it.
Dumi said, determination burning in his eyes.
We'll find its source and destroy it. Together.
The villagers nodded in agreement, their fear giving way to resolve. They had survived many challenges before, and they would survive this one too. Together, they began to prepare for the battle that lay ahead, knowing that the darkness would not go down without a fight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the village, Dumi and Kibo stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The fight for Sakana was far from over, but they were ready, and this time they would not back down. Night fell quickly over Sakana, and with it came a deep, oppressive silence that hung over the village like a shroud. The villagers had gathered in the square, their faces lit by the flickering flames of torches. They were armed with whatever they could find, spears, axes, even farming tools, anything that could be used to defend themselves. There was a palpable tension in the air, a mixture of fear and resolve, as they prepared for the coming battle. Dumi stood at the front of the group, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. These people were looking to him for guidance, for leadership, and he couldn't let them down. Not now, not when they were so close to confronting the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Kibo stood beside him, his staff glowing faintly in the darkness. The old man's face was lined with worry, but there was also a steely determination in his eyes. He had fought many battles in his time, but this one felt different, more personal. The darkness wasn't just an external force, it was something that had wormed its way into the heart of their village, turning it against itself.
We must stay vigilant.
Kibo said, his voice calm but firm.
The darkness will try to divide us, to sow fear and doubt. But if we stand together, if we trust in each other, we can overcome it.
Dumi nodded, his resolve strengthening with each passing moment.
We won't let it win.
He said, his voice filled with determination.
We'll protect our home, no matter what.
As the night deepened, the shadows around the village began to shift and move, twisting into strange, unnatural shapes. The villagers watched in horror as the darkness seemed to come alive, writhing and pulsing like a living thing. It was as if the very air had turned against them, pressing in from all sides, suffocating and cold.
Stay together,
Dumi shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic.
We're stronger as one. Don't let it break us.
But the darkness was relentless, its tendrils creeping ever closer, wrapping around the village like a suffocating blanket. The torches flickered and sputtered as the shadows pressed in, and the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the square as one of the huts collapsed under the weight of the darkness. The villagers cried out in terror, but Dumi quickly rallied them, his voice steady and strong.
Don't let it scare you,
He shouted.
We've faced worse before. We can beat this.
But even as he spoke, Dumi could feel the darkness growing stronger, its presence more malevolent and insidious. It was as if the shadows themselves were filled with hatred, lashing out at anything that stood in their way. Kibo raised his staff, the light flaring brightly as he directed it toward the encroaching darkness. The shadows recoiled, hissing and writhing as the light pushed them back. But it was only a temporary reprieve. The darkness was vast, and Kibo's strength was not limitless.
Dumi, we need to find the source.
Kibo shouted, his voice strained with effort.
This is just the beginning. If we don't stop it, the entire village will be consumed.
Dumi nodded, his mind racing as he tried to think of where the source of the darkness could be. It had to be somewhere close, somewhere that had been tainted by the dark power they had fought in the abyss. But where? And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. The well. The old, abandoned well on the outskirts of the village. It had been dry for years, forgotten and unused. But now, Dumi realized, it was the perfect place for the darkness to take root.
The well!
Dumi shouted, turning to the villagers.
We have to get to the well. That's where it's coming from.
The villagers hesitated, fear and doubt flickering in their eyes. The well was a place of superstition, a place that many avoided out of fear of what lay beneath. But Dumi's determination was unwavering, and his courage gave them the strength to follow.
Let's go,
Dumi urged, leading the way toward the well, Kibo at his side. The villagers followed, their steps quick and sure, even as the darkness closed in around them. As they approached the well, the air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, swirling around the ancient stones like a living thing. Dumi's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the edge of the well, peering down into the inky blackness below.
This is it,
Dumi said, his voice trembling with anticipation.
This is where we make our stand.
Kibo nodded, his expression grim but resolute.
Then let's end this, once and for all.
With a deep breath, Dumi raised the glowing crystal he had carried from the abyss, its light flaring brightly as he prepared to cast it into the well. The darkness roared in protest, the shadows writhing and twisting in fury as they tried to stop him. But Dumi's will was unbreakable.
For Sakana,
Dumi shouted, his voice echoing through the night as he released the crystal, letting it fall into the depths of the well. The light grew brighter, filling the well with a blinding radiance that cut through the darkness like a knife. The shadows hissed and recoiled, retreating from the overwhelming light as it pierced the very heart of the darkness. The ground beneath them trembled, and a deafening roar erupted from the well, as if the darkness itself was crying out in pain. Dumi watched in awe as the light consumed the shadows, burning away the malevolent presence that had plagued their village. The villagers, too, stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. The darkness that had once seemed so invincible was now being vanquished before their very eyes. Kibo stepped forward, his staff glowing brightly as he channeled his remaining strength into the light.
hold steady, Dumi.
He urged, his voice filled with determination.
We're almost there.
Dumi nodded, his grip on the crystal tightening as he focused all his energy on the task at hand. The light continued to grow, pushing back the darkness until it was nothing more than a distant memory. And then, with one final blinding flash, the darkness was gone, banished back to the depths from which it had come. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The villagers looked around in disbelief, their hearts pounding with the realization that they had won. The darkness was gone. Sakana was safe.
We did it.
Dumi whispered, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion.
We really did it.
Kibo placed a hand on Dumi's shoulder, his expression filled with pride.
You did it, Dumi. Your strength, your courage, you saved us all.
But even as the villagers began to celebrate, Dumi couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The darkness had been defeated, but the village was far from whole. The chief was still ill, and there was a deep, lingering unease in the air, as if the battle wasn't truly over. And then, from the depths of the well, a faint whisper echoed, sending a shiver down Dumi's spine. It was a voice, soft, insidious, and filled with malice. The darkness may have been banished, but it was not gone, not completely.
Kibo,
Dumi said, his voice trembling.
did you hear that?
Kibo's face darkened, his eyes narrowing as he listened. The whisper was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A reminder that the darkness still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again.
We've won this battle, Dumi.
Kibo said quietly, his voice filled with caution.
But the war is far from over. The darkness will return. It always does. But when it does, we'll be ready.
Dumi nodded, his resolve hardening. He had faced the abyss, fought the darkness, and survived. And he would do it again, as many times as it took to protect his village, his people, and the light that they had fought so hard to preserve. As the villagers gathered around them, their faces filled with hope and gratitude, Dumi knew that their journey was far from over. The darkness had been defeated, but the threat it posed was still very real. They would need to remain vigilant, to stay strong, and to be ready for whatever came next. But for now, they could celebrate their victory, knowing that, together, they had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the village of Sakana. The shadows that had once haunted the village were gone, replaced by the soft, gentle light of a new day. The villagers, exhausted but triumphant, began to emerge from their homes, their faces filled with relief and hope. Dumi stood at the edge of the village, watching as the sun rose higher in the sky. The events of the night before still weighed heavily on his mind, but he couldn't deny the sense of peace that now filled the air. The darkness had been driven back, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the village felt safe. Kibo joined him, his steps slow but steady. The old man's face was lined with fatigue, but there was also a sense of satisfaction in his eyes, a quiet pride in what they had accomplished.
It's a new day, Dumi.
Kibo said, his voice filled with warmth.
A new beginning for all of us.
Dumi nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon.
But the darkness, it's still out there, isn't it? Waiting for its chance to return.
Kibo sighed, his expression thoughtful.
Yes, Dumi. The darkness is always out there, but so is the light. And as long as we hold on to that light, as long as we stand together, the darkness can never truly win.
Dumi took a deep breath, the weight of Kibo's words settling over him. It was true. The darkness would always be a threat, but he had learned that there was also strength in unity, in hope, and in the light that they all carried within them. As they stood there, side by side, the village chief approached, his steps unsteady but determined. He was still weak, but there was a new spark in his eyes, a fire that had been reignited by the events of the night before.
Dumi, Kibo, thank you.
The chief said, his voice filled with gratitude.
You saved us all.
Dumi shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips.
We saved each other, Chief. This was a victory for all of us.
The chief nodded, his expression softening.
And we will continue to protect our village, no matter what comes our way.
As the three of them stood together, watching the sun rise over the village of Sakana, there was a sense of peace, a sense that, despite the challenges they had faced, they had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. But even as they celebrated their victory, Dumi knew that the journey was far from over. The darkness had been driven back, but it was not gone. It would return, just as it always did. But when it did, they would be ready. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the light within them was stronger than any darkness that dared to threaten their home. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, bathing the village in its warm, golden light, Dumi, Kibo, and the villagers of Sakana prepared to face a new day, a new dawn that held the promise of hope, of strength, and of a future that they would build together. What an incredible journey we've been on together. Dumi and Kibo's bravery and determination have shown us that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the light within us all can prevail. But as we've seen, the battle is far from over. The darkness may have been driven back, but it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. What did you think of this episode? Do you have any thoughts on what might happen next? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, and let's get a discussion going. Your insights and ideas are always welcome. And if you're enjoying this journey as much as I am, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next part of our adventure. There's so much more to come, and I can't wait to share it with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, the light within you is stronger than any darkness.